That's exactly the criticism that the Pharisees made of Christ when they looked on him and said, certainly he cannot be the Christ because he is a friend of sinners. If we read this in another way, that's what I see. Solomon purposed to take to him a wife who was of Egypt, Pharaoh king, and loved her. Why else would he have said that word affinity is a strong word? It doesn't mean he just liked her, or this was some political arrangement, but his heart was set on this woman. And I know that some will argue and say, well, that was his first step toward idolatry, but in reality, when we read where some of these women did lead Solomon into idolatry years later, but again, you look at all the women, all of these wives that he had, you say, how is that a type of Christ? Let me ask you something. Look at yourself. Are you a member of Christ's body or aren't you? Are you any better than any one of those wives that Solomon took? They were his. They were his to do with what he will. And they were owned by him. And that was part of his rule and his kingship. And so when we stand off like the Pharisees and look at Solomon, point the finger and say, who are we but Pharisees then, thinking ourselves better? So here is the first area in which Solomon was a Christ-like king. For Joab had turned after Adonijah. That was the fourth son of David that rose up in rebellion against him. Though he turned not after Absalom. You can see he was faithful to David during Absalom's rebellion, but now when Adonijah rebelled, he turned. How much time is there between supposed faithfulness to the Lord and then turning? I'll tell you, if the Lord ever takes his hand off you, we'd all turn in a minute. That's what the Lord said to Peter. The only difference between Peter and Judas was that the Lord said he prayed for Peter. And when thou art converted, he said, go and exhort the brethren. We could easily be a Joab who had for some time professed faithfulness to Christ, even this gospel message, and yet in an instant are turned away. I'll tell you, if you turned away, it's that you never were the Lord's. I do know that. But look at here. Joab fled unto the tabernacle of the Lord and caught hold on the horns of the altar. Now that's just like what we saw over in 1 Kings chapter 1 and verse 50 that Adonijah did. This is David's own fourth son that thought that by running in, it says he feared because of Solomon, arose and went and caught hold on the horns of the altar. And he was executed. Right there. Didn't matter that he was David's blood son. He was executed. I don't know what thinking other than the blindness of Joab's heart here left to that blindness that made him think that he could be safer doing which was of no comfort even to Adonijah. Because that's what it's saying here. Then tidings came to Joab, for Joab had turned after Adonijah. He had seen what the Lord had done to Adonijah. Now he saw this wheel of justice moving his way. He said, well, what's wrong with that, running in and catching hold of the horns of the altar? That wasn't for any sinner to do, only through a mediator. Such preaching has brought great division. Why? Because it gets people's eyes off of Christ and onto each other. And then they begin comparing themselves one with another, when in reality, we're all condemned. If we want to use the law as our standard and our obedience to it, we all stand condemned. And that's why Paul wrote that here in verse 4, chapter 1. Neither give heed to fables and endless genealogies which minister questions. I come from a better background than you do. I was raised in a home where I was taught to live right, do right, and be right. That's how people reason. And it causes them just to look down their nose. I heard a man say one time, preacher stand up and say, I thank God alcohol's never crossed these lips. Well, how does that make you any better of a person? In his mind, he thought so. In his mind, he thought so. But he stands condemned with the worst of drunkards. You see, if that's his thought.